Hi, this is Dr. B, and in this video I will break down the parts of a research proposal and give you some tips for effective proposal writing. It's important to remember that proposals are persuasive, so no matter if you're writing a research proposal, a grant proposal, or a small business proposal, your job is to convince a reader that a problem exists, that you have a solution to that problem, and a detailed plan to make that solution a reality. You're writing to a decision maker, either someone inside or outside of your organization, and you're seeking their approval for your project. The main challenge we face when writing proposals is that we have to write in a very specific, detailed way about something that we haven't done yet. A proposal is different from a pitch in that each section is developed in enough detail that our reader can visualize our plan every step of the way. This is the key to being persuasive enough to gain approval. Every proposal contains these basic components, though depending on the specific proposal, some of these components may be separate sections or they may be combined into one. I'll cover each section in detail. An introduction may be the first thing that a reader reads, but it's often the last thing we write as writers. That's because it's hard to introduce something that doesn't exist yet. In the introduction, you clearly state your purpose in writing, whether that's to inform, persuade, etc. You establish the scope of the project and the document, and you make it relevant to your reader in some way. Finally, you do what I call forecasting, or previewing the document, letting the reader know what they can expect in the rest of the document. There are many strategies for writing an introduction, but the important thing to remember is to answer these 5 questions. What is this? What is it about? Why am I reading this? Why should I care? And what will I find in the rest of the document? One challenge for writers is to answer the why am I reading this and why should I care questions for the reader. Don't take the relevance of your document and the project for granted. Make it explicit to your reader. These are the main elements in an introduction, though they may occur in a different order. The main thing to remember is that as a writer, you don't just want to discuss the purpose of a project, but also the document itself. You may need to provide some background information about your topic. Depending on your reader, you may want to also provide more or less background depending on how familiar they are with your topic. In some proposals, background information can be included in the introduction. If your background information is rather long or you develop this in a lot of depth, you may want to create a separate section or a subsection. This is where you'll also include the motivation for the study, which you will develop in more detail in the plan section. Remember that you're still framing the importance and significance of this project and giving the reader any information they'll need to understand the rest of the proposal. In a proposal, you'll also review any pertinent literature. In an engineering proposal, this may be existing designs or solutions to the problem. In a research proposal, this is a review of the published literature. You're highlighting what has already been done to solve this problem or answer this question, and then highlighting the gap or the need for continued work. The literature review answers the questions: what has been done on this already? Why is more work needed? And how will this project build into what has come before? In some proposals, the literature review is a separate section. So for example, this is common in the humanities. In the sciences, the literature review section is sometimes in the introduction or background section. Your choices of organization depend on what makes sense for your reader and what meets their expectations. So check the style guide or the guidelines that your reader expects you to use. We'll cover literature reviews in more depth later, but there are many ways to organize a review. You can use this review to provide more in-depth information on a subject, to help argue for a problem or an opportunity, and to review trends or developments in the field. Remember that there are many uses of secondary research, and our use of them in our writing is not limited to the literature review. We can use secondary sources throughout our writing to relate our work to a larger body of work, to highlight gaps or illustrate problems or lingering questions, to refine our methods as evidence to support our claims, or to compare and contrast our results with others' work. So secondary sources may occur in our methods, results, and discussion sections as well. The plan section of the proposal is the most important section. In writing, we assign more space to the most important information. So because the plan is the most important information, this will make up most of the space in our proposal. There's an important saying in proposal writing: people fund plans, not ideas. Our plan is important not only for ourselves as researchers, but to build our credibility for our reader. The plan section starts with a detailed discussion of the objectives of the proposal. Depending on the type of proposal, this may be a problem statement, the research questions, research aims, or all of the above. The idea is that you need to sell the reader on the problem just as much as you need to sell them on the solution in a plan. Remember that proposals are persuasive. We need to convince them there's a need first. Depending on the type of proposal, this section will have a lot of information. Essentially, you want to build a picture in the reader's mind. What is the problem or need? What are the reasons why this is a problem? What are the negative effects of not doing this project? Then you want to preview your goals for the project, which you'll go into more detail about later in this section. Be sure to establish the scope of the project. You can't do everything. What are the boundaries of your work? Finally, think about how you will evaluate your project. How will you know if this has been a success? In a business proposal, this usually includes milestones for 1, 3, and 5 years. In a research proposal, it will be criteria for determining whether or not the research questions have been answered. These are the major components of a plan. They're called different things in different types of proposals. Essentially, make sure you're communicating your goals for the project and including both major and minor steps to complete the project. This is very difficult for writers, but you need to show your readers step by step how you will actually complete this work. Then discuss any outcomes or deliverables. What exactly do you plan to produce by the end of the project? For example, a deliverable may be a report or a presentation. Discuss the benefits of the work. These are usually the opposites of the negative impacts of the problem you discussed earlier. Finally, a good plan includes a detailed timeline for completion of the project and a discussion of any personnel or their qualifications. Then you'll wrap up your proposal with a conclusion. The conclusion sometimes includes a budget, or it may be a separate section, depending on the proposal. Check the specific guidelines of the organization you're writing this proposal for. Conclusions are sometimes difficult for writers because we feel like we're repeating ourselves. However, our reader needs a quick recap to help make sense of the most important information about what they just read. Recap the main points and spend a little time discussing their implications. Remember that we're trying to be persuasive, so we have to provide our rationale for why this is important or why the reader should care. An important part of the conclusion is to overcome any objections. Remember that people make the mistake of thinking that a persuasive document only discusses the positives. However, it's more persuasive to anticipate any objections or concerns the reader may have and argue for why, in spite of these concerns, this project should still be approved. The conclusion mirrors the introduction, so I like to write them side by side and make sure they logically flow from one to the other. These are the main questions to address for your reader in a conclusion. What is the most important info about what I just read? What is the problem? What should we do about it? And what happens if we don't? What are the next steps? What are the benefits of this proposed project? And why do they outweigh any drawbacks? Again, there are many strategies for writing a conclusion. Just make sure this information is clear to your reader. So, these are the main components of a proposal and what each of these can do for your reader. So reach out with any questions. You can send me an email, post to the discussion forum, or we can meet in office hours. I'm happy to brainstorm ideas for your project, workshop your proposal, or talk about any other issues.